I think a lot of them are LED now. That one isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blue ones are. They're quite hot lighting. I guess, filter over the cameraman, filter the feed. Okay, shall we kick this one off? So thanks for coming to this stream, and anyone who's logged in on the virtual side, welcome as well. Quick housekeeping, we're strictly keeping to time constraints because of the virtual streaming side as well. And to that end, please lodge any questions you have via the app. If you have problems with the app, come up, I'm in the front corner, let me know and I'll lodge a question on your behalf. If there are interrupt questions, like you really don't understand what the new speaker is talking about, then just come up and bother me and we'll get it asked. It's just that way we can have all the people on the stream as well know what's going on. So now we have Ben Mudie. He's here to talk about supply chain attacks to AD, specifically the on-prem variety. Ben's a technical team leader, security engineer with Tenable, and he has a lot of experience, especially in the Windows infrastructure side of things. His blurb says he has a passion for security and executing solutions that just work. Now, to me, that sounds a bit silver bullet-ish until you remember back in my day with system administration, the ultimate goal is actually laziness and not having to do stuff. So I think that's a very good thing. So without further ado, Ben.
Thank you.
Sorry for anyone listening in, the mic isn't working here.
That's cool.
Thank you. Now he's on, so.
I'll just go over that again. So this presentation was put together just before Tenable acquired Alcid. So Alcid was a French cybersecurity company, and I'll get into a little bit of that in a later, but Tenable is well known for vulnerability management, and so I've now moved over to Tenable as a security engineer. So what we're talking about today is supply chain risks against Active Directory. Now, Alcid as an organization before Tenable acquired us, where I'll just talk about Alcid for a minute. Alcid was founded by two incident responders who worked for ANSSI, which is the French National Agency for the Security of Information Systems. There's a very famous white paper called Active Directory Control Paths using graph theory to read the CEO's emails or get to domain administrator. And this research formed a well-known security penetration tool called Bloodhound. Now, what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of the risks of the vulnerabilities in AD and how supply chain attacks can really compromise our security boundaries now, because it's not necessarily that you're just protecting from insider threats when it comes to your Active Directory environments. We've now had some recent attacks, especially with the ones we'll go over today, where these attacks have basically compromised our security boundaries and the attack is on the inside without having to compromise any of our firewalls. Now, one of the very recent ones, which if you're a systems administrator, you may well know, was a couple of the recent Exchange vulnerabilities. So on January 6th, Hanafeng, a Chinese state-sponsored group known for targeting the US, released an attack against a very large number of Exchange servers. And these were using 0 days, and these were pre-authentication vulnerabilities. So they didn't have to be inside the network. They could just get in and start accessing these environments. And we'll get into what they were doing with their web shells and things like that. But these attacks allowed them to get straight inside the network, and they actually went basically undetected for a couple of months, where it wasn't until the 2nd of March this year where the patches were actually emitted by Microsoft for us to be able to secure our environments. Now, it's a reasonably well-known one, but the numbers basically state out that about 60,000 Exchange servers were actually compromised by this vulnerability. And that's actually a massive number, and really shows to what organizations are using AD. I know I've put Exchange servers everywhere, from large enterprises down to little real estate offices. AD and Exchange and these vulnerabilities go across the entire gamut of the customer sizes. Now, since the patches were released, it became even more well known that these vulnerabilities were out there, and people started scanning for them even more. Now, it's not so fast. That wasn't the only vulnerabilities, and there's been even more since then. So another 4 were released in early April, and then there were even patches released even as early as a couple of days ago by Microsoft on some more of these issues. So there were 4 additional 0 days announced in early April, and these were found by the NSA. And some of these vulnerabilities were pre-authentication vulnerabilities, and some of them even had CVFS scores of 9.8. So that's pretty bad when it comes to vulnerabilities, when it comes to pre-authentication and getting into your environment. And this is showing us that these attacks, they're just going to keep happening, and this is the only attack style. Now, in this instance, what they were doing was they were launching web shells, and these web shells allowed them basically to have unfettered access to these Exchange servers. Now, I don't know about you, but if anyone's inside my network, especially on some of my Exchange servers, they're pretty critical to my environments, and they also have a lot of access. So from that, you can use it as a launch pad to go through and start querying Active Directory, and you can start leveraging weaknesses that exist. We all know about the common vulnerabilities like Kerber roasting and some of the delegation vulnerabilities that are out there. As an attacker's already in the environment, they can start launching these attacks and starting to compromise our environments and try and further their access in our environment. So basically, there's a lot of permissions that are given to Exchange, and there's a lot of Exchange security groups that actually exist that these servers are members of that have very high level access in AD. So it's a big concern. Now, Exchange is not the only vector, especially with the move that we've all had because of the pandemic to remote work. VPN appliances have been, a really big part of our environments. Split tunneling is a little bit of a solution, but there's a lot of hardware that was left out there, and there's a lot of well-known compromises that have actually come about by some of the vulnerabilities in these VPN appliances. So a couple of them were complete authentication bypass attacks, where attackers could get into these VPN appliances and they could not only get the configuration out of them and and start accessing traffic, they could log into the VPNs themselves. And it's just basically like an attacker's in the front door. They are plugged directly into your network, and they can start accessing everything that you would have internally. And getting credentials as part of that attack is relatively easy. Now, the credentials are quite often used for just querying LDAP for people being able to log in. So an attacker being able to get your directories after that point, if you've got weaknesses that exist in there, the environment's no longer safe. Now, the other thing we really can't forget about is Sunburst and SolarWinds. This is a little bit of we keep banging on about this because we are not, as cybersecurity professionals, going to forget the name SolarWinds for a very long time, because it was so well used by our industry, and it was such a breaking of trust. When we talk about vendor supply chain risk, this is where one of our trusted vendors has had compromise done. And it has meant that all of the hard work we've done with segmenting our infrastructure, putting in our layered security, sometimes is made moot by a single vendor's weaknesses. And that's one of the things that, the Tenable.ad product, which I now work on, is very different, where it, doesn't use privilege, it doesn't use agents. And we'll get onto that in a little bit, into some of the, how can you actually go about protecting your Active Directory environments, and how can you protect yourself against some of these vendor supply chain risks that actually exist out there. Now, this attack, which was Sunburst, went on for a very long time. The initial compromise was basically nearly a year before, leading up to them eventually striking. Now, we're not sure if that was because they didn't have the access they needed, or they were waiting to get, into more places. It really comes down to what they've done. But to their credit, SolarWinds has done a great job, and this slide is actually from there, where they've actually gone through and and laid it out. But the backdoor itself basically was a signed component of their environment. And the key point, which is down there, and the snippet from FireEye, was this attack would not do anything unless the machines that it was on were domain joined. They're not looking to compromise a single computer. Why compromise a single server when you can compromise an entire organization's computers just by leveraging a couple of weaknesses in an environment, and being able to not only compromise one machine, compromise hundreds or even thousands. If you look at recent ransomware incidents, and we'll get into those later, like Dairy Farm or Maersk or people like that, these are environments where they've had to spend millions of dollars of effort to recover, and sometimes they're not the same after that. So what are the attackers actually doing once they're in the front door? And what are they actually doing to our directory structures, and how are they going about things? So the first thing they're going to do once they're actually in the environment is go and try and find some credentials. Now, this could be a simple method of getting credentials on the way in. So they could have got it as part of the VPN they've accessed via. They could have had an authenticated session in there. They could have actually gone around and had one of the vulnerabilities in some of the VDI solutions like Citrix, where they were, attackers were fighting over the unsecured endpoints and, protecting them for themselves. And then, if there are no credentials as part of the initial compromise, the attackers will need to use other methods to get in. Now, when we talk about directories, employees generally, we move between companies. Every couple of years we'll move. And I know that, I use pretty unique passwords, but there's passwords that we all at one time have used, and we might have used them for personal, and we might have used them for work. And that's where, looking up where our data has been leaked in a service like Have I Been Pawned or something like that comes in. So these dumps and the passwords that are in there, I know I get at least 5 or 10 emails a week saying, we've got your password. And it's this: if you don't send us a couple of Bitcoin, we're going to leak your information. And I know it's from a forum when I was like 17 or 18, and it's the same password I used for a couple of years. I don't do that now. I'm a good person, but it's one of those things. And on the corporate side, there's other services like Breachaware, where you've got organizations that are collecting credentials of these services and collating them basically so that you can go, I'm looking for users of X company and I want to find credentials that might exist out there. Some people don't use their personal email addresses to sign up for their web forums, or even Ashley Madison, some people who got done in that hack. There were corporate email addresses all through those. And what that means is services like, the remote desktop marketplace that's on the dark web. I want to buy credentials to a company's environment so I can get past all of your security and start accessing it. I can get it for as little as $10. So there are, other search engines out there like Shodden and things like that, where you can go in there and if you know what to search for, you're looking for, say, Dell iDRAX or something like that, you can find open endpoints on the web. And if you want to buy credentials, it's not that complicated. And once you have actually gone through and managed to get some credentials to an environment and you're going looking, what are you going to actually do? So the first thing is I'm going to run some data collection. Now, this is an example here where I'm just simply running some data querying, and I'm using the utility called SharpHound. And what SharpHound does is part of the Bloodhound suite. And what it does is it allows me to go in and upload the data from the environment. And this is a well-known vulnerability now where attackers are known to be bundling some of these, open source tools that we as defenders are using, and they're going and using them. And as a pretty easy method, because of the pre-canned nature of some of these queries, shortest path to domain admin, find unsecured principals and things like that. In bigger environments, it's much harder to do this because a lot of the systems may actually detect how much data you're downloading. I can tell you these queries are pretty noisy when it comes to that. But when we're talking about the information we want to collect, we're going to be trying to find the shortest path to a user we can laterally move to compromise. And ideally, that's going to be a user we may already have the credentials for. We're using this as a point for information gathering, and we're just trying to isolate, as a basically authenticated user, how much data can I get out of the environment? And what this example here is showing is just a really basic Bloodhound query of how much access a standard user has about your AD environments. You got to remember, people think AD is secure. It's not. AD is basically the telephone book for your environment. Everything and every user that's in there is, easily queryable if you haven't gone and hardened the environment. Now, what do they do once they're in, and what are they really after? So that's one of the big things here. And we can only hope it's money. Because if it's money, it's something that insurance companies are great at dealing with. It's something that organizations have, policies for nowadays, cyber ransom insurance and things like that. Now, the thing is, it's not necessarily just money. And that's the problem. It's industrial espionage. It's, we've seen recent attacks because of the hybridization now of IT and OT. We've got production environments out there that are, doing critical functions like airports and power utilities and things like that. And these all run on AD. And if we can compromise that system, we can do some real damage. You look at what's happening in the US right now with the pipeline attack, where they basically shut down and they're having, gas shortages because of this. So we don't know that that's because of that, but it's a cybersecurity weakness that these attacks can have a really big impact. But that's enough of that. Why are they actually going after AD? And what makes AD inherently so weak? Because it's the core of everything. If you look at your Azure Active Directory, you look at your some of your cloud services, you're normally going to be federating your root identity back to your on-premise environments. we're going to be having our, the source of truth there. If we've got a synchronization up to a service like Okta or something like that, the asset is normally coming from our on-prem. We all have legacy services, and we all have done investments in infrastructure that, it's tied to our on-premise directories. Some organizations have a path out, but it's a multi-year path out. And because attackers are now cottoning on to how easy it is to exploit some of these environments, it's become a really big source for targeting. Now, the other thing is, and we'll get into it in a minute, AD is 20 years old. It came out in 1999, December to be exact. And prior to that, we had NT directory services, but it's meant that the skills we've honed as, administrators on the environment, I can tell you from personal experience, going onto the security side of the house rather than the AD admin side of the house, it's a completely different picture, because we have to think about what we're doing, because there are literal tick boxes that exist in AD that mean that an attacker can basically compromise our account very quickly. Now, this is a couple of metrics from the Tenable research team. Basically, 60% of new malware specifically has code that targets AD. And leveraging one of the critical vulnerabilities, moved from the initial phishing of the domain via email to domain admin within 5 hours. I don't know if your cyber response is that fast, but most organizations isn't. It'll go into a ticket queue and the guy will get to it on Monday. Now, 80% of organizations that have been audited for AD had critical misconfigurations in place. I can tell you, I've done a lot of them here in Australia, and I've only found one that we never found, a big critical issue that we would have been able to easily walk through. So it's something that is pretty easy to find. And 95% of organizations are basically using it that are on the large scale. Now, we talk about security in AD, and it hasn't changed much in 20 years. So modern AD, late 1999, and AD was introduced in the mid-90s, the original designs, and it was really designed to be constrained to a confined and trusted network. The connectivity of WAN networks and the modern internet was not really something that we were thinking of back then. And there are design decisions within AD that really speak that out. One of the vulnerabilities I'll come back to, which is Kerberoasting, it's a vulnerability that exists in the protocol and they can't patch. You can only monitor for it and make sure your environment's hardened. And that's just because it's part of the design, part of what they originally had, and can't really take it away. And settings and processes that were considered to be safe many years ago no longer are. In hindsight, if AD was built today, and look at what they're doing with Azure AD, we wouldn't use the authentication protocols we've got in there now. The privilege control processes, SD propagator and service principal names, we wouldn't really use those. It makes it too easy to find information. And the trust of AD users to see every other user in the directory. There's no way we would do that nowadays. I know we have, services like Slack where we can see every other member, but, being able to query that on some of our directories is not necessarily great, especially when they're federated. And AD is really at the source of all of these compromises. So you look at, say, Norsk Hydro. They had a ransomware attack. Their cyber insurance has paid out less than 20% of the net cost currently of what that attack has cost them. So the cyber insurance won't only protect you, and a lot of these attacks have been so well known and so well documented that some of the names like SolarWinds will be in infamy for many years. Now it comes back to a bit of a core problem there where we haven't put much investment into what we're doing with our AD environments currently. We do a lot on our endpoints where we might have our phishing simulators, we might have some endpoint protection, we might have protection on the other endpoint like data loss prevention and things like that. But the bit in the middle where we're talking about lateral movement and privilege escalation within AD, we're quite often doing, once a year, twice a year audits. We might have an assessment that runs every day and just spits a report into an email address. Whether we look at it or not is not necessarily that high on a lot of organizations' priorities. We, as organizations, quite have a lot of problems with our firewalling, what our users are doing on their computers, and because everyone's gone to working from home, the company laptops are being used for a lot more than they were previously, and we're having to have access to our corporate environments as well. And it's normally full time where we're putting in VPNs, where a compromise on a staff member's laptop, because it can connect and because it can query AD, these attacks are only going to get more common until we start taking the security of our directory structures from point in time assessments to the same philosophy we're doing with a lot of our outputs on other services, where as soon as an issue is identified, it goes into remediation. So let's get on to what are some of the things you can actually do to go through and fix it. Now, this is one of our slides from our sales guy down in Melbourne for Tenable.ad. And the biggest thing is, let's identify the risks and not hide them. So there are a lot of misconfigurations in Active Directory that we will normally just brush under the carpet because it looks good, the service is functioning, it hasn't gone down in a couple of years. Does that mean it's secure? Not necessarily, but IT budgets, they're stretched. We're not putting the investment in there, and there's a lot of weak configurations in Active Directory that can lead to compromise. So we've just got to, look under the curtain, make sure that what we're looking at is actually, we're identifying these issues, we're putting them into action plans, and we're going through and doing it. Now, there's a couple of, things we can do about hardening our environment, especially when it comes to, these vendor-based attacks we're talking about. And it's making sure that trusted configurations from some of our vendors, we need to go back sometimes and ask, do you really require domain administrator in my environment for your tool to work? Do you have an ability of your product to use a lower privileged account, even if it means, every time the software gets updated, once every 6 months or something, I have to do it manually. It reduces that risk surface because agents are one of our biggest worries, especially in light of these recent supply chain attacks where those agents were leveraged to attack our environments, and quite often they had domain administrator. Now, we also need to monitor and raise alerts, preferably in real time, and that's a bit of a play to our product there, about any of the changes made in AD. Make sure that the changes are being made by approved personnel and are not being made by applications we don't know about. And the other thing is see if changes are being made externally. But a lot of big organizations especially have Active Directories that may be part of a managed service. And quite often the company will own the risk, but they may not necessarily be able to identify it. And that's where having at least some visibility over what the AD security posture is like can be useful, because it's our organization's risk after all. Have a process in place to track changes, and don't neglect GPOs. I can tell you, I've gone into environments where there's thousands of them that are unlinked, and they have a lot of duplications. That's one of the big things. And we'll talk about agents there. And this is actually a comment from the Microsoft new privileged access management strategy, which is for on-prem infrastructure and infrastructure as a service. The attack surface dramatically increases with management and security agents. So this is where we need to be aware of what our vendors are doing and whether they actually require the level of access they are requesting in our environments. And there's a couple of key takeaways. It's difficult to scrutinize attacks that are coming from trusted third-party apps. Most of the third-party apps request for local or domain administrator. It's just a simple question you can quite ask when the software is being deployed. Do you need it? Can we get around having that level of privilege and follow a least privilege model in our environments? And the bigger thing is a lack of real-time monitoring. We might be having our SIEM solutions that are feeding that data into our SIEM, but unless we're doing correlation and analyzing it, we're not really taking good advantage of that. Now, there are a couple of government efforts on some AD security. So ASD have a secure administration guide. The primary intent of this is just traditional corporate network assets and things. So I highly recommend you read that if you're in a role for that. And there's some mitigation strategies by CISA. I won't cover these in detail because they're pretty heavy, but there are some source links that are up there which I would highly recommend you go and read, especially if you're in an avenue where you are responsible for directories. Now, challenges you can solve. Basically, this is the little bit about our product, which is it's designed to find and fix the weaknesses, uncover the attack pathways, detect the attacks in real time and as they're ongoing, and investigate for your incidents and hunt for threats. So, does anybody have any questions? I think is there any on the app?
There are no questions showing on the app yet, and I've got 2 windows open to it just in case it's not working properly. Does anyone in the room have any questions?
Perfect.
No, you're explaining it well then.
Thank you very much, everyone. If you want to have a discussion about AD security, please definitely swing by the co-branded Tenable and LSID booth we have in the event hall, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like. We're always happy to discuss security topics around here.
Great, thank you, Ben. Thanks. Cool. Well, I think everyone, we're going to have lunch out in the vendor hall, I believe from about 12:20 till 1:20. Okay, any further questions, feel free to come up and have a chat to Ben afterwards. And thanks everyone on the virtual stream.